They didn't spit when they said it, they smiled. 200 delegations sat beneath the crystal dome, and when Ambassador Elise Warren cited habeas corpus, open ledgers, and due process, the elder species answered with the good manners of grave robbers. "Human statutes aren't charming," purred the speaker, orb light skittering along his translucent seams. "But this is the high forum. We recognize universal practice." Universal practice, it turned out, meant this: a human relief ship had been interdicted after broadcasting a rescue request. Its crew were detained pending indemnity. The detaining house now sought payment in children. Earth called it piracy. The council called it custom of lanes. The chamber murmured the way rich men murmur when the bill arrives and they've already decided not to pay. Warren did not raise her voice. "Our law says persons are not cargo. Our law says sanctuary, clinics, schools, creches, food lines is absolute. Our law says a writ can cross any border if it is carried by a citizen who refuses to look away. And our law," the speaker said, gentle as a man laying a napkin over blood, "says young species should be slow to lecture elders about civilization. Your courts are local storms. This is the weather." The vote to uphold universal practice flashed green across the dome. The relief crew would be escrowed to a steward port. Their captain, an Iowa nurse who could fix a ventilator with a ballpoint pen, would be invoiced to her own government. A Dominion broker congratulated a Vrax collector near the rail. Somewhere in the upper tiers, a polite camera cut to a sponsor logo and a chef recommending a seasonal consommé. Earth did not flip the tables. America has thrown tea into harbors and blood onto beaches, but its deepest instincts are quieter, more dangerous. Warren closed her folder and said only, "Earth will not appeal." Then she turned, walked out of the dome, and did not take another call for 10 days. The feeds called it a tantrum. The columnists said provincial stubbornness. Traders recalculated premiums. A child in Tulsa asked her civics teacher why a law could be called universal if it made you sell your neighbor. "Because grown-ups sometimes decorate cruelty," the teacher said, and erased the day's lesson plan. On the new board she wrote, "What makes a law lawful?" In Cheyenne Deep, where the air tastes like old voltage and coffee, Admiral Jonah Carr met a room that wasn't just soldiers. Judges, chaplains, stevedores, school principals, union organizers, data architects with bitten nails. The name on the wall wasn't task force, it was Constitutional Corps. On the table, a scanned parchment older than Starflight, a worn pocket edition, a stack of affidavits from ports where universal practice smelled like bleach in cages. Carr tapped the board with a knuckle. "We tried to fit inside their treaties," he said. "They mocked the roof that kept our children dry. All right, we're Americans. When the frame sags, we don't argue with the wind. We build a new roof and invite the whole street." Walsh, lead systems engineer, slid open a case of beacons and printed manuals. "You can't scold a galaxy into decency," she said. "You can standardize it." On the screen behind her bloomed words that made some in the room ache with recognition. Sanctuary, witness, contract honesty, open ledger, safe passage, writs across borders, harbor standards. Not a poem, a checklist. They argued. God, how they argued. A rabbi wanted more mercy, a marine wanted more teeth, a principal asked for recess built into every doctrine. A Crex doc foreman on exchange said, "If you don't publish the audit at 15 and 45, the crane crews will ignore you even if you're right." A Lakota engineer wrote consent in block letters on the margin and circled it until the pen squeaked. An appellate judge with grapes in her bag, because someone always remembers to bring fruit, kept asking, appeal to what? Until the room answered, to a standard we can carry. The hook wasn't a threat. It was a sentence scratched on a board nobody would erase now that they'd read it aloud. They mocked Earth's laws, so humanity wrote its own. The next morning, Concord Station announced a convention. Not a photo op, 40 days. No press except a public feed bolted to the ceiling. Everyone expected speeches. What they got was assignment boards and cot rotations. What they heard drifting through the station's ribs as the lights dimmed for midnight were the oldest American sounds. Pages turning, coffee pouring, people who think law is work whispering over verbs. Beneath the dome, the speaker rehearsed smugness. In the docks, the crane crews sharpened pencils. In a farmhouse outside Des Moines, a mother asked her daughter what she learned in civics today. That law isn't what the biggest voice says, the girl replied. It's what the smallest can trust. For 10 days, Earth did not answer calls. It wrote. They called it a convention because the word tastes like coffee and Saturdays. America likes its revolutions to meet quorum, publish minutes, and serve chili in crock pots. Concord Station's central gallery had the look of a union hall built in orbit. Folding chairs, taped extension cords, signs drawn by hand because printers always run out of cyan at the worst moment. Every 8 hours the bell chimed and committees switched. Sanctuary, witness, harbor safety, writs, interdiction, money that doesn't lie. The chairs weren't all human. A Crex welder with a scar like a river explained crane safety to a senator with the patience of a saint. An Arthurian monk drew a map of mercy with chalk. A Dominion nurse told a Marine sergeant precisely how many minutes a child can be in vacuum before words start to slur. The room didn't clap. It wrote rules. Sanctuary came first. The charter drafted language so blunt it felt like a tool. Clinics, creches, schools, and food lines are immune from seizure, interdiction, tariff, lien, or threat. Any commander who violates sanctuary forfeits commission, passage, and pension for a generation. No exceptions. Sunset clauses only to make standards harder, never looser. Witness was next. The convention remembered how power lies when it wants to. They designed an institution not of robed mystery but of office hours. A bench made permanent, funded by a tithe on port fees, chaired by those who lost. Rotating, cross-species, paid enough to say no, protected enough to say stop. 2 independent beacons for every interdiction. Raw feeds public by default. If you wouldn't read it to a room of 14-year-olds, a truth class teacher said, don't do it. Harbor safety turned culture into checklist. Air quality, water purity, ladder angle, hull seam, crane load, union break, audit posting at 15 and 45. Standards make saints, Walsh said, and taped the line to a column because slogans help when sleep is a rumor. Writs across borders answered the speaker's smear. A writ could not be called provincial if it traveled in the pockets of those who fed the lanes. Any citizen of a signatory may carry a writ to any port that flies the lantern. Refusal to answer is a forfeiture of corridor privileges. The lawyers argued jurisdiction until a stevedore pointed at a map and said, where the lantern shines, decency applies. The phrasing stuck. Interdiction scared them. Americans do not trust power without counters. They wrote marshals of the charter into being and then wrapped them in chains you could audit. Every stop logged, every calorie fed, every bolt tightened, every shot explained. Abuse of lantern frequency earned 10 years of dock duty under witness eyes. Redemption is a shift schedule, the chaplain said, half joking, entirely right. Money came last because it's the rudest guest at every table. Markets teach, said a grocer from Queens. Make them teach the right thing. The convention wrote open ledger into law. No secret escrows for sanctuary goods, no insurance payouts for corruption, no derivatives backed by suffering. They built Orchard, a sanctioned lattice that could prune diseased branches without salting the soil. We won't starve children to get at thieves, Warren insisted. We will cut thieves off from kitchens. The new charter picked a spine: personhood, sanctuary, witness, contract honesty, safe passage, writs across borders, open ledgers, harbor standards, proportionate interdiction, reparations. It read like a civics class taught by welders. It nodded to the old parchment without fetish and borrowed shamelessly from anyone who had ever kept a promise in a storm. Enforcement needed ships, but not the kind that preen. Circuit-class carriers were built to be courthouses with engines, clinics in the port bow, classrooms starboard, brig cells that looked like dorms because you can restrain a body without starving a soul. The lantern lattice was a network of beacons keyed to a frequency children could hum. If your daughter can't tune it on a toy radio, Carr said, your doctrine isn't for people, it's for speeches. On day 28, they argued commas. On day 30, they argued how to apologize when a marshal got it wrong. On day 39, a Union Hall on Ceres sent a sheet pan brownie recipe optimized for microgravity. The kitchen taped it next to Ritz, plain language. On day 40, they read the thing aloud. No trumpets, a bell. People took off their hats. They stood in a room full of folding chairs and cheap coffee and promised each other something older than law and newer than dawn. We will be present. We will be transparent. We will be proportionate. We will be stubborn for the small. They called it the new charter because Americans understand that constitutions aren't relics. They are tools you sharpen when the roof leaks and your neighbor's kids are coughing. The new charter wasn't a demand letter. It was a notice taped to the galaxy's door at eye level, to all ports, polities, and persons. 1. Sanctuary is absolute. 2. Witness is permanent. 3. Contracts lie if they hide suffering. 4. Writs cross borders with the lantern. 5. Interdiction is a checklist, not a theater. 6. Open ledgers or no lanes. Opt in within 30 days and fly the lantern. Abstain and stand clear. Obstruct and learn proportion. Earth didn't send an army to deliver it. It sent beacons and books. Charter marshals rode out in circuit-class ships named for local geography: Bronx, Yukon, Chattahoochee, Navajo, because a law that can't say the names of places is an aristocrat's hobby. They didn't broadcast threats. They opened clinics, posted audits at 15 and 45, taught port kids to tune the lantern frequency, and handed stewards a laminated card titled Harbor Standards 101. The first responses broke into 3 hymns. The predators laughed. The proud abstained. The practical asked for manuals. Akeshan Union Hall hung a lantern above its door and wrote sanctuary hours on a chalkboard. A Dominion monastery flew the frequency from its bell tower and printed charter pamphlets in tiny type because monks love footnotes. A Vrax warlord issued a decree declaring the charter provincial, theatrical, unenforceable. His grandchildren would later hang their school timetables under a lantern. Money flinched sooner than guns. Orchard activated with a gardener's patience. Charter goods, sanctuary cargo, clinic stock school kits, moved on green lanes at zero tariff for signatories. Ports that refused to audit found their insurance rates rising like bad weather. Derivatives backed by customary indenture quietly failed to clear. Shipyards that paid union wages discovered priority slots. "We didn't topple capitalism," Walsh said to a camera she did not enjoy. "We changed the coupons." The council staged a procedural tantrum, motions, mandates, a draft opinion from the High Secretariat declaring lantern beacons unauthorized interference with sovereignty. Warren circulated a one-page reply that became a sticker on lunch boxes. "Sovereignty ends where children begin." It wasn't a legal theory. It was a boundary sentence you can teach to a room of 14-year-olds. Charter courts assembled themselves wherever folding chairs could be placed under light. A freight bay on Calyx, a school gym on Ceres, the back room of a bar where a Dominion carpenter had once learned to plane a stubborn board. The bench wore no wigs. They wore badges and calluses and grief. They heard the case of the broken airlock. A steward port lied on maintenance. A child died. Reparations paid with years, not tears. They heard the case of the honest mistake. A marshal overreached, apologized on camera, logged corrective training. Witness posted the video under try again. The charter made friends the council didn't notice because they weren't glamorous. Dock clerks who liked posted hours, midwives who liked clean water, teachers who liked textbooks that arrived when promised. The lantern frequency became muscle memory for kids with toy radios. A Crex foreman recorded a video explaining ladder angles and signed off. The new charter is not a sermon, it is a step stool. On day 28, the speaker announced Mandate 12. Any port flying a lantern would lose council insurance, patrol, and quorum privileges. On day 29, 4 insurers defected to open ledger because premiums fall when audits are honest. On day 30, the Chamber of Commerce of the Lanes, a thing no poet loves and all kitchens need, voted to recognize charter manifests as best practice. Grudging? Sure. Binding? Absolutely. The predators still laughed. They had fleets, old treaties, titles engraved on silver. They would test the thing. They always do. They chose a port that had learned to sneer at sunrise, Morn Gate, seat of a syndicate whose crest was a polite knife. The port posted tariffs like curses and sanctuary hours like suggestions. When a school barge requested docking, a steward replied with an invoice that named the children line items. When a clinic freighter asked for clean water, the steward said perhaps. When a charter marshal served a writ under lantern, the steward laughed and called it provincial. Circuit-class Chattahoochee arrived without drama, her hull the color of honest metal, her bays full of things ports never have enough of, parts, nurses, clerks with pens that write through grease. She lit the lantern. She posted audits. She set the soup on. She broadcast the writ again, this time with 2 witness beacons and a public clerk ready to upload to open ledger. Morn Gate fired a warning shot across a school barge's bow. The barge was painted with unicorns because children like lies that admit they are lies. The shot scorched a horn. Witness recorded, charter posted. The galaxy watched a steward preen. Proportion, Carr said into his headset. The harbor lattice woke. Think of it as a web woven out of the boring miracles that keep starports alive. Power spines, pump schedules, ladder locks, crane interlocks, credit clearers. The lattice didn't explode anything. It enforced standards. It shut valves that fed bribe tanks. It froze accounts that tried to invoice a creche. It opened doors that had accidentally jammed when a clinic asked for coolant. It made mean men ordinary by making their favorite lever click no. The syndicate scrambled its fleet. Old hulls, arrogant guns, captains who thought intimidation was a trade. Chattahoochee didn't posture. She flew a pattern dock cruise call Uncle, slow, steady, inevitable. Garrison lances spoke once each. Guns powered down with a dignity they hadn't earned. Harriet cutters trimmed engine bells into sculpture that would someday decorate a school's atrium under a plaque that read "Formerly Dangerous." A flagship tried the oldest trick: hide behind civilians. A school barge drifted into the line of fire. A clinic freighter overfilled its tanks because someone had tightened valves 6 months ago and never logged the maintenance. Lattice corrected. Marshals adjusted. The shots that had been lines became ellipses that missed by physics, not luck. "We built this to protect what our mothers would yell at us for forgetting," Walsh said, fingers on sliders. Morn Gates' governor went on the air, performed outrage with the craft of a man whose mirror has always obliged him. Humanity imposes provincial moralities on sovereign. Warren interrupted with a sentence the lanes would memorize because it fit on a sticker. "We do not impose. We disclose. We standardize. We enforce proportional care." Then she handed the feed to the bench. A Crex widow read out the litany: air violations logged, ladder angles wrong, invoices fraudulent, sanctuary hours mocked. She didn't raise her voice. She put the receipts on open ledger. It turns out commerce hates lies when it has to swallow them on camera. The fleet stood down, not because it had been conquered, but because it had been measured. The governor signed access under charter to restore water and avoid the humiliation of a full audit with highlighters. The school barge docked. The clinic freighter hosed its tanks. The steward who had laughed was assigned 10 years of dock duty under witness eyes. He would learn to love posted hours. Back under the dome, the speaker tried one last gambit, a censure. "Humanity has arrogated." "A standard," Warren said. She set a printed copy of the new charter on the dais and a bowl of soup next to it, steam rising in the cold light. "We publish, we feed, we fix. We film, we file, we forgive proportionally. We refuse to be lied to. Join us. Stand clear or keep calling your weather universal while your roofs leak." The vote to condemn died in committee because constituents had seen unicorn paint scorched by universal practice. Instead, a motion rose from a coalition nobody had scheduled: recognize charter beacons as lawful markers of sanctuary and safe passage. No anthem, no fireworks, just present tense, "We will." Earth didn't declare empire, it declared maintenance. Marshals rotated home and were replaced by teachers. Circuit-class ships took on lumber and desks. The lattice idled at a hum you only notice if you've slept under bad ceilings. The charter lived not as a thunderclap but as a calendar: audits at 15 and 45, sanctuary hours, office hours, writs served with soup, appeals heard by people with calluses. HFY stories like to end with a roar. This one ended with a notice taped at eye level and a lantern humming like a porch light. They mocked Earth's laws. Humanity wrote its own. And then, most American of all, it kept them loudly in public, until even the proudest abstainers found themselves scheduling around decency. They tried to bury the charter under paper. The speaker convened an emergency midnight session and arrived haloed by aides carrying binders that smelled of hot ink. Abstaining blocks filled the tiers. proud in their refusal to be taught by a species they still pronounced as if the word were a caution. With ceremony meant to conjure legitimacy from volume, they unfurled a rival text, the Counter Charter of Sovereigns. Its preamble hummed with old words: custom, prerogative, dignity, each a curtain hung to darken a room where children were trying to breathe. Article by article the mask slipped. Sanctuary, they said, would henceforth be locally defined, such that a creche could be redescribed as juvenile housing attached to labor facilities. Witness would be appointed for continuity, which is how tyrants say no elections. Writs would end at borders because sovereignty is sacred. Contracts would be honored if signed, even if cultural norms demanded signatures from the terrified. It was a scholar's mausoleum. The flowers were citations and the dead were the living. Some of the chamber exhaled in relief. There was a document now, and documents soothe the sort of mind that thinks ink absolves. They looked down on the human enclosure as if waiting for outrage they could mistake for immaturity. Ambassador Elise Warren did not oblige. She walked to the dais with a single tablet and mirrored open ledger onto the great dome so the galaxy could read without a translator's perfume. "You say our law is provincial," she said. "Let us examine your universal." Her finger scrolled to a contract filed that morning under counter-charter protection, quiet, polished language cloaking a mining family. She read one clause, evenly. In the event of loss of laborer due to hazard or attrition, compensation shall be remitted in offspring. No gasp, not at first. Older houses had trained their faces not to move. But the feed was live, the text was plain, and in the upper galleries, a Crex dock foreman watching from a sleep pod clenched a jaw that fed 3 sons. A school hall in the Aquatic Coalition paused its lesson and grew very still. A Dominion Parish Council, too polite to interrupt, simply turned up the volume. Walsh stepped to a floor mic and lit a hand lantern. It wasn't ceremony. It was demonstration. The charter tone settled over the chamber, a kind hum that ran along the bones. Behind the delegates, the dome blossomed with footage witness had filed in the last 30 days. A port guard refusing a clinic because recognition pending. A stevedore tearing down a sanctuary by appointment sign. A child tracing the lantern frequency on a napkin with a crayon and handing it to an officer who looked like he wanted to cry. "Your counter-charter isn't law," Warren said. "It's camouflage. Daylight does not negotiate with a mottled coat." She opened Orchard's pane and tapped a single box. Premium tables reflowed. Insurers that had remained studiously neutral blinked and found their risk engines screaming. Exclusions invalid, exposures terminal. Someone on the sovereign benches whispered about market interference and then caught himself. The numbers were indifferent, not ideological. Dishonesty leaks. The speaker tried for grandeur. "What Earth proposes is imposition. What we offer is peace." "Peace with invoices for children," Warren replied. "The charter does not impose, it standardizes. If your practice cannot survive being read aloud to a room of 14-year-olds, it is not culture. It is cowardice in costume." At first the defections were procedural, motions to table, to consult, to amend. Then they were mortal. A union of carriers announced they would not moor at ports flying the counter-charter unless audits were posted at 15 and 45 and sanctuary hours matched the charters. A monastery published a pastoral letter. Lanterns would be lit above every bell and any soul, sovereign or supplicant, could walk in and eat. The Arthurian translators, famously fastidious, amended their style guide. Sovereign discretion translates as unreviewable harm. The countercharter's authors sprinted to revise the ugliest clauses. They softened offspring to lineal compensation, then domestic apprenticeship, then something made of commas and shame. Each revision produced memes within the hour, children taping rejection stamps to the words as if they were labels on bad groceries. The dome felt the temperature change the way a porch feels thunder coming 30 miles off. Power didn't leave the speaker. It forgot he existed. Walsh asked for permission to demonstrate a final point. She did not wait for the gavel's sulk. She broadcast the local definition of sanctuary from a sovereign port and then overlaid the charters. The two frames misaligned by the width of a lie. A nurse pointed. A stevedore cursed softly. A senator's lips moved as she counted the differences and realized each represented a bruise. When the lights came up, the counter-charter still existed in the way ruins exist, labeled on maps and useful mostly to warn hikers where not to build. The speaker adjourned with a sentence that mistook breath for victory. He had not heard the sound under the benches, pens scratching as delegates who had brought nothing home for years finally wrote something their teenagers would not despise. The galaxy slept curiously that night. In kitchens, parents repeated the clause Warren had read until anger acquired grammar. In port bars, crews argued about the charter not as an ideal but as a list. Post the audit, run the hours, serve the writ, stop pretending. It was the first lesson of power the humans taught in this new century. That sunlight is a tactic when you aim it and a structure when you build it into the roof. They called them wars because wars sell headlines. Marshals called them campaigns because campaign implies a map, a calendar, and the obligation to send thank-you notes. The first flare came at Vaynar, a freehold where smugglers taught euphemisms to children and charged admission. A circuit-class carrier, Bronx, blocky and beautiful the way a courthouse is, slid into the pattern dockers call Uncle, too steady to shove, too patient to outlast. She lit the lantern and posted sanctuary hours in 6 scripts. The station's sovereign steward smiled directly into the camera and closed the doors to a school barge. Local definition, he said. The harbor lattice woke. It is the charter's quiet miracle, woven from a century of unglamorous truths. Pumps scheduled, rails grounded, cranes balanced, ladders at the safe angle even when nobody is looking. The lattice did not strike. It enforced. Bribe tanks lost pressure. Payroll scripts flagged conditional captivity and refused to clear. The steward's favorite valve, the one that kept clinics negotiating for water, clicked to compliance only. He pounded the panel and found himself arguing with standards which do not blink. Vaynar called for muscle. Old hulls answered, guns polished, crews drilled on intimidation, doctrine engraved on metals instead of manuals. Bronx's captain did the politest violent thing a republic permits. She hailed, "Read the writ," and played back the steward's refusal against the sanctuary overlay. 2 witness beacons blinked in the upper corners like a pair of patient eyebrows. When the first shot came, predictable, theatrical, badly aimed, garrison lances spoke once each, turning cannons into sculpture without denting a galley or a creche. Harriet cutters lifted engine bells off their mounts and laid them on pallets like penitent crowns. By week's end, Vaynar signed access under charter not because it had been conquered, but because dishonesty is exhausting when someone keeps publishing your receipts. The station went quiet in the good way. Water pumps sighed, cranes remembered their math, children walked to school under a lantern that hummed like a porch light. The second campaign found worse weather. Port Naranak prided itself on being the place where rules forgot to pack. Its governor staged his refusal like theater, velvet-voiced, flanked by banners, the sort of man who calls human law quaint and pronounces quaint to hurt. Yukon arrived with nurses, clerks, and a bored Marine platoon carrying clipboards. The governor fired at a hospital ship's shadow to prove sovereignty still had teeth. The shot blackened a painted unicorn on a school barge. Witness did not edit. 2 angles, raw audio, a child's sharp breath when the horn charred. Orchard propagated the clip to insurers, routing tables, and cruelest audience teenagers. Naranak's traffic vanished as surely as if a sun had gone out. "We don't fear Earth," a Crex freight boss told an interviewer, eyes on his ledger. "We fear being seen being stupid." The governor signed access before dinner and filmed an apology that sounded like a man learning a language late in life. Campaign 3 was not a port but a corridor, the sable thread, where pirates rented sovereignty by the hour. Marshals did not chase. They staged lantern tolls, soup rings, school rings, tug rings. Predators arrived to taunt and left with engine bells shaped like lilies. A corsair captain fired on a creche. Harriet for once took 3 shots to convince him. He lived. His engines did not. The bench wrote him 10 years dock duty under witness eyes and assigned him to refrigeration maintenance, because salvation comes cold and he could earn pride keeping vaccines alive. The feeds called it Lantern Wars and tried to cut montages that made choreography from correction. The lanes learned something more dangerous than spectacle, boredom that honors. Audits at 15 and 45. Sanctuary hours that turned into lullabies. Writs served with soup and a pen that writes through grease. In kitchens, grandmothers mocked the word war and kept feeding anyone in line. In classrooms, kids practiced the lantern frequency the way earlier generations had practiced handwriting. After the 4th campaign, navies stopped leading with guns and started leading with ledgers. Ports pre-posted audits. Governors filmed themselves reading the charter into cameras they used to blink away. Insurers offered discounts for marshals invited rather than resisted. Pride did not vanish. It learned schedules. The galaxy discovered a humiliating secret. Compliance feels good when it stops children from coughing. Some fights still tried to be fights. A Sovereigns League flotilla massed at Meridian Gate, banners bright with counter-charter crests. Navajo arrived alone and anchored nose in, showing welders' names along her flank like scripture. Her captain read the writ once. The flotilla fired once. The garrison answers were almost tender. Engines sighed into silence. The flotilla drifted into a painted circle on the traffic map labeled Time Out. A tug named Hazel brought soup. The campaigns did not make empire. They made habits, which is more dangerous to tyrants and more generous to neighbors. When cables snapped and roofs fell and someone had to show up with a ladder at the right angle, the charter's hum was already in the bones of the lanes. The speaker called them incursions. Dockers called them Tuesday. Power that does not teach is a house without handrails. America knows the bruise of that fall. Reconstruction taught us that liberation without curriculum decays into nostalgia and grievance. So the charter set aside tonnage for Truth-class school ships and wrote into law what elders already understood. Education is not charity, it is maintenance. When a Truth class folds open, it looks like a neighborhood taken seriously. Workshop bays breathe pine and solder. Classrooms glow with the gentle arrogance of good lighting. A kitchen hums because hungry minds are inefficient motors. A clinic murmurs the grammar of pity that doesn't condescend. On the outer hull, stenciled in paint meant to scuff and be repainted by the next class. If you can't explain it to a 14-year-old, it isn't a law, it's a spell. Curriculum began where adults often refuse to. What went wrong last time? The first unit was called Reconstruction, then black codes dressed as contracts, debt peonage hiding in ledgers, courts inventing new words for old chains. Students read clauses that had made grandfathers kneel and practiced underlining the seam where the lie lives. The companion unit, Reconstruction, now showed how Orbit could reinvent those tricks with transit custody, customary indenture, cultural escrow. The assignment was not rage, it was repair. Rewrite this clause until your grandmother can bless it without lying for you. Children learned the lantern frequency before multiplication tables because rescue should never wait on algebra. They learned why audits post at 15 and 45, so the crane crews know when they can go to the bathroom and not be blamed for a missing bolt. They learned to cook beans for 300 and to tune refrigeration coils with fingertips. HFY has always been more kitchen than cavalry. Skeptics tried to ban the syllabus. A Sovereigns League minister denounced earthborn pedagogy and called the lantern idolatry of order. The clip went viral in the boring way. Under it, ports posted their audit boards, kids waved from sanctuary lines. A Crex midwife explained in exquisite detail how clean water saves more souls than sermons. The minister resigned to run a food pantry. Witness hired him to schedule volunteers. Truth-class ships taught elders, too. A Vrax foreman, once proud to mispronounce provincial, sat beside a human teen and learned ladder angles. An Arthurian monk built a model crane and cried when it lifted a paper box exactly as designed. A Dominion captain who had heckled a marshal in Part 4 returned for office hours to ask whether apologizing on camera was required or simply wise. The bench answered, both. The camera is a mirror you borrow until your children trust you again. Education made enemies of lethargy more than malice. Ports that had flown the lantern performatively now had to pass harbor standards 101 without a tutor. Some failed. The charter did not sneer. It assigned a remedial crew, 2 nurses, 3 electricians, a clerk with forms, and a grandmother with a voice that could hush a hanger. Marshals stood back and let the shop class run. Afterward, the port painted a line on the floor at exactly the safe distance from a drop, and children taught elders why the line mattered. A new sport appeared on schoolyards, marshal and bench. One team served writs, the other played governors, and everyone took turns being witness with a clipboard because the fun part is telling adults to slow down. Complaints reached the speaker's office that children were glorifying bureaucracy. He watched a clip of a kid saying, "No, sir, you can't invoice a creche," and turned off the feed. Later, alone, he downloaded the writs, plain language pamphlet, and read it twice. The most radical class was also the quietest. In a room full of elders ashamed of their signatures on bad contracts, a teacher wrote, "Forgiveness equals disclosure plus labor plus time." She did not promise absolution. She scheduled it. Men who had worn medals learned to love broom handles. Women who had worn silks learned to love the accuracy of a properly tallied ledger entry. Teenagers saw adults keep promises long enough to be trusted, which is a miracle you can cook on a Tuesday. By the time the second cohort graduated, the galaxy had a new accent, sentences with checklists inside them, humor that included posted hours, patriotism that sounded like a shift handoff. The charter had become not a human imposition, but a family habit, which is the only way laws live longer than the men who write them. The speaker asked for the meeting in a voice that had finally discovered its own ribs. Behind the polite request lay a simple admission. The council could not keep its citizens safe with a doctrine that called weather universal and roofs provincial. He arrived under the dome unadorned. No banners, no harpists of precedent, only an old man with a talent for procedure and the look of someone who had recently watched a child sleep under a lantern. "What happens," he asked, "when the wolves come for us? Does your charter extend to those who mocked it?" Warren set the new charter on the table and slid a bowl of soup beside it as if to remind the moment that law is for bodies, not slogans. "Protection is not a prize for flattery," she said. "It's a schedule. If you fly the lantern, you are under its shield, even you. Especially you, if only to teach your grandchildren that mercy, correctly built, is structure." He searched her face for triumph and found maintenance. Around them the galleries were full not of courtiers but of foremen, nurses, teachers holding clipboards as if they were flags. The bench took its seats, grief on its lapels like medals that had learned humility. Walsh dimmed the lights a fraction and brought up the lantern lattice, ports glowing steady, corridors pulsing like arteries, circuit-class ships idling like firehouses that belonged to neighborhoods rather than princes. "Terms," Warren said, because Americans mistrust salvation without bullet points. 1. Fly the lantern without adjectives. No conditional sanctuary, no registered creches. If the word requires footnotes to keep you brave, you are not ready to protect anyone. 2. Submit to witness without pageantry. 2 independent beacons for every engagement. Publish raw feeds by default. Apologize on camera when you miss. Schedule the fix. 3. Adopt orchard, open ledgers or longer routes. Sanctions prune, they do not starve. If a kitchen goes dark because of your pride, the bench will assign you to dish duty until you remember what hunger feels like in a child's throat. 4. Train marshals from your people. We'll loan you ships and manuals. You supply neighbors who want to be useful. Abuse of the lantern earns 10 years dock duty under witness eyes. Redemption is a shift schedule, not a sonnet. 5. Sunset your old words. Universal practice, cultural escrow, lineal compensation, archival terms now, suitable for museums with thick glass and braver docents. The speaker pressed his palm to the charter. Perhaps he hoped to find the heat of empire and was confused to find the warmth of a kitchen. "And if we sign and are attacked, then we come," Warren said simply. "We don't ask who you voted for. We ask where the children sleep." He signed, not with a flourish. Those are for treaties that mistake cameras for covenant. But with the hand of a man who has misfiled too much for too long and wants his desk clean by dinner. Delegations that had hidden behind abstentions drifted down the aisles as if gravity had changed. Some signed from hope, some from fear, most from exhaustion with their own faces. It counts. The wolves did come, because wolves also keep schedules. A Sovereign's League remnant tested a lantern port on the rim the week after the speaker's ink dried. Chattahoochee answered because she was closest. 3 Crex marshals flew with her because they had been trained. A Dominion monastery sounded the bell and kept the soup warm. Garrison lances made flower metal where guns had been. Harriet cutters trimmed engines into memorials. Witness posted 2 angles and a recipe for feeding 400 with dignity. The port slept that night under the charter, not because Earth had planted a flag, but because neighbors had remembered how to be neighbors on a schedule that forgives neither malice nor delay. Back in the chamber, the speaker looked smaller, also freer. "Will you stay?" he asked, meaning empire without daring the word. "We will be here," Warren replied, which is not the same as staying. Empire possesses. Stewardship schedules. We will keep the lights on until your grandchildren are bored by decency. Then we will go home and check our roofs and invite you for chili if you're in town. The dome's glass caught 100 lantern reflections and for the first time in a long time did not look like a mirror pretending to be a sky. In ports where the charter had arrived first, kids taped their day's checklists to refrigerators. Audits at 15 and 45. Sanctuary hours. Homework. Lantern check at dusk. In kitchens, grandmothers tasted soup and added salt and shook their heads at the parts of law that still needed work. In schools, teenagers practiced saying "we the neighbors" and laughed at themselves and said it again, straighter. They had mocked Earth's laws. Humanity wrote its own. The power that followed was not a roar but a hum, the sound of pumps that run on time, of fans that keep clinics sweet, of engines that stand down when a porch light says "children live here." The galaxy learned a brutal mercy, that the strongest thing a people can do is build a rule so decent even their enemies are relieved to obey it.